Hello, Internet! It's time for Chapter 4 of Ozma of Oz. I've got additional munchkins here tonight. I've got Arthur, who's normally here, Annabelle, who's often here, and two of Annabelle's friends who I will not name for the sake of anonymity, but they are here to celebrate Annabelle's 13th birthday party with her. So, it's time for Chapter 4 of Ozma of Oz. We get to meet one of my favorite characters tonight, which is exciting. We get to meet Tick-Tock the Machine Man. Actually, this chapter is named Tick-Tock the Machine Man. So I'm assuming he'll show up in this chapter. Let's read. After an hour or so, most of the band of wheelers rolled back into the forest, leaving only 3 of their number to guard the hill. These curled themselves up like big dogs and pretended to go to sleep on the sands. But neither Dorothy nor Billina were fooled by this trick, so they remained in security among the rocks and paid no attention to their cunning enemies. Finally, the hen, fluttering over the mound, exclaimed, "Why, there's a path!" So Dorothy at once clambered to where Billina sat, and there, sure enough, was a smooth path cut between the rocks. It seemed to wind around the mound from top to bottom like a corkscrew, twisting here and there between the rough boulders, but always remaining level and easy to walk upon. Indeed, Dorothy wondered at first why the wheelers did not roll up this path. But when she followed it to the foot of the mound, she found that several big pieces of rock had been placed directly across the end of the way, thus preventing anyone outside from seeing it and also preventing the wheelers from using it to climb up the mound. Then Dorothy walked back up the path and followed it until she came to the very top of the hill, where a solitary round rock stood that was bigger than any of the others surrounding it. The path came to an end just beside this great rock, and for a moment it puzzled the girl to know why the path had been made at all. But then the hen, who had been gravely following her around and was now perched upon a point of rock behind Dorothy, suddenly remarked, "Looks like a door, doesn't it?" "What looks like a door?" inquired the child. "Why, that crack in the rock facing you," replied Billina, whose little round eyes were sharp and seemed to see everything. "Runs up one side and down the other, and across the top and the bottom." "What does?" "Why, the crack. So I think it must be a door or rock, though I don't see any hinges." "Oh, yes," said Dorothy, now observing for the first time the crack in the rock. "And isn't this a keyhole, Billina?" pointing to a round, deep hole at one side of the door. "Of course. Now, if we only had a key, we could unlock it and see what's in there," replied the yellow hen. "Maybe it's a treasure chamber full of diamonds and rubies, or heaps of shining gold, or—" "That reminds me," said Dorothy. "The golden key I picked up on the shore. Do you think it will fit this keyhole, Billina?" "Try it and see," suggested the hen. So Dorothy searched in the pocket of her dress and found the golden key. When she had put it in the hole of the rock and turned it, a sudden, sharp snap was heard. Then, with a solemn creak that made the shivers run down the child's back, the face of rock fell outward like a door on hinges and revealed a small, dark chamber just inside. "Good gracious!" cried Dorothy, shrinking back as far as the narrow path would let her. For standing within the narrow chamber of rock was the form of a man, or at least it seemed like a man in the dim light. He was only about as tall as Dorothy herself, and his body was as round as a ball and made out of burnished copper. Also, his head and limbs were copper, and these were jointed or hinged to his body in a peculiar way, with metal caps over the joints, like the armor worn by knights in days of old. He stood perfectly still, and where the light struck upon his form, it glittered as if made of pure gold. "Don't be frightened," called Billina from her perch. "It isn't alive." "I see it isn't," replied the girl, drawing a long breath. "It's only made of copper, like the old kettle in the barnyard at home," continued the hen, turning her head first to one side, then to the other, so that both her little round eyes could examine the object. "Once," said Dorothy, "I knew a man made of tin, who was a woodman named Nick Chopper. But he was as alive as we are, 'cause he was born a real man and got his tin body a little at a time. First a leg, and then a finger, and then an ear, for the reason that he had so many accidents with his axe, and cut himself in a very careless manner." "Oh," said the hen with a sniff, as if it did not believe the story. "But this copper man," continued Dorothy, looking at it with big eyes, "he's not alive at all, and I wonder what it was made for and why it was locked up in this queer place." "That's a mystery," remarked the hen, twisting her head to arrange her wing feathers with her bill. Dorothy stepped inside the little room and got a back view of the Copper Man, and in this way discovered a printed card that hung between his shoulders, it being suspended from a small copper peg at the back of his neck. She unfastened the card and returned to the path where the light was a little better, and sat herself down upon a slab of rock to read the printing. "What's it say?" asked the hen curiously. Dorothy read the card aloud, spelling out the big words with some difficulty, and this is what she read. Smith and Tinker's patent double action, extra responsive, thought creating, perfect talking mechanical man, fitted with our special clockwork attachment, thinks, speaks, acts, and does everything but live. Manufactured only at our works in Evna, land of Ev. All infringements will promptly be prosecuted according to law. "How queer," said the yellow hen. "Do you think that's all true, my dear?" "I don't know," answered Dorothy, who had more to read. "Listen this, Billina. Directions for using. For thinking, wind the clockwork man under his left arm, mark number 1. For speaking, wind the clockwork man under his right arm, mark number 2. For walking and action, wind clockwork in the middle of his back, mark number 3. N.B. This mechanism is guaranteed to work perfectly for 1,000 years. "Well, I declare," gasped the yellow hen in amazement. "If Copper Man can do half these things, he's a very wonderful machine. But I suppose it's all humbug like so many other patented articles." "We might wind him up," suggested Dorothy. "See what he'll do." "Where's the key to the clockwork?" asked Billina. "Hanging on the peg where I found the card." "Then," said the hen, "let us try him. Find out if he will go. He's warranted for 1,000 years. It seems that we do not know how long he's been standing inside this rock." Dorothy had already taken the clock key from the peg. "Which shall I wind up first?" she asked, looking again at the directions on the card. "Number 1, I should think," returned Billina. "Makes him think, doesn't it?" "Yes," said Dorothy, and wound up number 1 under the left arm. "Doesn't seem any different," remarked the hen critically. "Why, of course not. He's only thinking now," said Dorothy. "Wonder what he's thinking about." "I'll wind up his talk, and perhaps he can tell us," said the girl. So she wound up number 2, and immediately the clockwork man said, without moving any part of his body except his lips, "Good morning, little girl. Good morning, Ms. Hen." The words sounded a little hoarse and creaky, and they were uttered all in the same tone without any change of expression whatever, but Dorothy and Billina understood them perfectly. "Good morning, sir," she answered politely. "Thank you for rescuing me," continued the machine in the same monotonous voice, which seemed to be worked by bellows inside him, like the little toy lambs that cats and children squeeze so they will make a noise. "Don't mention it," answered Dorothy, and then, being very curious, she asked, "How did you come to be locked up in this place?" "It is a long story," replied the Copper Man, "but I will tell you briefly. I was purchased from Smith and Tinker, my manufacturers, by a cruel king of Ev named Evoldo, who used to beat all his servants until they died. However, he was not able to kill me because I was not alive, and one must first live in order to die, so that all his beating did me no harm and merely kept my copper body well polished. This cruel king had a lovely wife and 10 beautiful children, 5 boys and 5 girls, but in a fit of anger he sold them all to the Gnome King, who by no means of his magic arts changed them all into other forms and put them in his underground palace to ornament the rooms. Afterward the king of Ev regretted his wicked action and tried to get his wife and children away from the Gnome King, but without avail, so in despair he locked me up in this rock, threw the key into the ocean, and then jumped in after it and was drowned." "How very dreadful!" exclaimed Dorothy. "It is indeed," said the machine. "When I found myself imprisoned, I shouted for help until my voice ran down, and then I walked back and forth in this little room until my action ran down, and then I stood still and thought until my thoughts ran down. After that I remember nothing until you wound me up again." "It's a very wonderful story," said Dorothy, "and proves the land of Ev is really a fairyland as I thought it was." "Of course it is," answered the copper man. "I do not suppose such a perfect machine as I am could be made in any place but a fairyland." "I've never seen one in Kansas," said Dorothy. "But where did you get the key to unlock this door?" asked the clockwork voice. "I found it on the shore, where it was probably washed up by the waves," she answered. "And now, sir, if you don't mind, I'll wind up your action." "That will please me very much," said the machine. So she wound up number 3, and at once the copper man, in a somewhat stiff and jerky fashion, walked out of the rocky cavern, took off his copper hat and bowed politely, then kneeled before Dorothy, and said, "From this time forth I am your obedient servant. Whatever you command, that I will do willingly if you keep me wound up." "What's your name?" she asked. "Tick-Tock," he replied. "My former master gave me that name because my clockwork always ticks when it is wound up." "I can hear it now," said the yellow hen. "So can I," said Dorothy. And then she added, with some anxiety, You don't strike, do you?" "No," answered Tick-Tock. "There is no alarm connected with my machinery that I can tell the time, though, by speaking, and as I never sleep, I can awaken you at any hour you wish to get up in the morning." "That's nice," said the little girl, "only I never wish to get up in the morning." "You can sleep till I lay my egg," said the yellow hen. "Then when I cackle, Tick-Tock will know it's time to waken you." "Do you lay your egg very early?" asked Dorothy. "About 8 o'clock," said Billina. "And everybody ought to be up by that time, I'm sure." And that is the end of Chapter 4 of Ozma of Oz. Tick-Tock is super cool. There's actually a picture. I'll show you the picture of Tick-Tock. The machine man. He's got a little machine mustache, which is weird, but I dig it. I like Tick-Tock. He's cool. He's one of my favorite characters. He's got a book named after him that we'll read later on in the series. This is Book 3. That was Chapter 4. Chapter 5 will be tomorrow night at 8 o'clock right here. Facebook Live. Good night.